Hey guys, it's Ropes here, and today I want to talk to you about card draw. Card draw and the jobs that cards perform in Slay the Spire, and how to build hands of cards which are good at the jobs which they need to do. I get asked a lot of questions like, is it ever possible to have too many copies of Noxious Fumes, or isn't Anger a free card, or things like that, which suggests to me that a lot of people, maybe coming from Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering, where the way that you draw cards every turn is completely different, are not quite grasping what's going on with card draw and being able to do different jobs in this game. I wanted to try to give you a good rundown of how I'm thinking about it. Let's talk about the Ironclad deck first as a starting off point. I did actually make a presentation for this, but I was going through it and just like wasn't vibing for me. So we're just gonna roll it impromptu. I don't know. I just did a 24-hour stream. Maybe my brain's not quite set for reading presentations yet or something. Ironclad starts with 6 attack cards and 4 block cards. You start with 1 bash, 5 strikes, and 4 defense. And early on in the game, pretty much the only jobs you're asked to do are deal single target damage and block attacks. If you look at Ironclad's ability to do these things, Ironclad is very good at saturating 3 energy worth of energy every turn. 3 energy worth of energy? Yeah, whatever. Very good at saturating 3 energy every turn on attacks. You're regularly going to draw a bash and a strike, or 3 strikes, and that's all of your energy spoken for. Ironclad's actually quite poor at saturating 5 cards drawn worth of attacks, so what I mean by that is that regularly you're going to draw a bash and 2 strikes, or 4 strikes, and all of a sudden you're not actually saturating all of your card draw dedicated toward single target damage. You're drawing cards for single target damage, which you can't play, even when you want to spend all of your energy on that job in a turn. Some turns you don't even want to spend all of your energy on that job, and so when you want to defend for a turn, drawing 4 strikes and 1 defend is especially bad, because not only is the 4th strike a worthless card, but the 3 other strikes that you would play if you wanted to deal damage are also worthless on that turn. So for turns where Ironclad wants to attack more, a card like Anger is actually very good. Anger lets Ironclad saturate the cards drawn in the turn better. If you draw Bash, Strike, and Anger, now you're able to spend 3 cards on attacking despite the fact that you only have enough energy to play Bash and Strike. Similarly for Ironclad, early on, a card like Clothesline, which sinks 2 energy into mitigating and dealing damage, can be quite good because you're getting mitigation. And a card like Flame Barrier is superb, because Ironclad is quite bad at saturating energy into defense early on, and when you want to do your defensive job, you're often not drawing enough energy worth of cards to actually do it. So getting a Flame Barrier into the deck helps you with that. You're wanting to add a 2-cost card that's good at defending, because you don't draw enough energy worth of defensive cards for the turns where you want to do that job, but you want to add a 0-cost card for attacking because you draw too much energy worth of attacks every turn to do that job. If you add a Battle Trance to the deck, all of a sudden a card like Anger becomes even better than it was before, but you might start wanting to, instead of adding Flame Barrier to your deck, it might be more important to add a Rage to your deck, because now when you draw an 8-card hand after you've played Battle Trance, or a 7-card hand minus the Battle Trance, I guess, you're regularly going to have way too much energy worth of cards for all of the jobs, and this 0-cost stuff becomes much more important. On the other hand, if you don't get a Battle Trance, Flame Barrier becomes very good, and a card like Uppercut, which lets you saturate your energy to valuably create damage and mitigation, becomes very good. A card like Shockwave becomes very good if you only have 5 cards drawn every turn, because of its ability to saturate all of your energy on mitigation and damage. Hopefully this is making some sense on how how much card draw and how much energy you have and how many cards in your deck are good at doing which jobs goes into deciding which cards to add to make your deck better at the problems that's being asked. Now, the same things can be said for other classes. In Silent, you're very bad at saturating energy to deal damage early. And so a card like Skewer, I think, is often overlooked. But Skewer Plus, letting you sink 3 energy into dealing damage, this is great in like the Gremlin Nub fight or the Lagavulin fight for the early game Silent deck, or against Slime Boss in particular if you can draw it on the right turn. Similarly, a card like Predator early, this lets you saturate energy into dealing damage in 2 ways. 1, it's a 2-cost attack for right now, and 2, next turn you're going to draw 2 more cards, which gives you better odds of hitting 3 strikes. So this card considerably improves your ability to saturate your energy into damage. Silent's very good at block, and Silent's so good at block that saturating energy for block doesn't become a real thing. It's more about saturating your card draw of block cards. And because of that, Neutralize is a very good upgrade. Neutralize is a very valuable card to be playing because it meaningfully adds to your mitigation without actually requiring you to spend more than 3 energy on mitigation in a turn. It's going to be much more impressive to upgrade Neutralize than it would be to like add another Backflip to your deck, because Backflip is going to draw you more cards, but the card draw that you need is for the turns where you want to deal more damage, not for the turns where you want to gain more block. So gaining 5 block on a turn where you're drawing 2 cards doesn't make too much sense for the early game Silent deck. You probably could have already just played like Survivor, Defend, Defend this turn or something, because those are the cards in your starter deck. A card which draws cards while dealing damage makes more sense. So Predator or Quick Slash. Quick Slash deals 8 damage and draws a card that helps you out on the turns where you want to deal a lot of damage. And you just don't play it on the turns where you want to create a lot of block. Okay. You can't realistically expect to be able to saturate all of your energy for whatever job you want on every turn of the entire game. So I've talked about like dealing single target damage and mitigating incoming damage as 2 jobs right now. But there are other jobs like dealing AoE damage with Dagger Spray, and this job is just not important enough, consistently enough, for it to be worth creating a deck which can do it every single turn. Having a Dagger Spray or even 2 Dagger Sprays if you're up against Slime Boss in Act 1 can be great on the other hand. And being able to deal some AoE damage for the Tri-Slavers fight and Gremlin Leader in Act 2 and against Reptimancer in Act 3 is immensely important. But you only need a certain amount of that job to get through those problems. And having a potion like an Exploding Potion could even mean that, you don't need to add more than 1 card to do this. You've got the card plus the potion, plus maybe you have like a Mercury Hourglass as a relic, and these things add up to making your deck good enough to do the job. Making sure that you're not going overboard on jobs which aren't that important is a very big thing. You don't need to add more than the amount of energy you have per turn of front-loaded damage for single target damage. It just isn't necessary. You don't need to make your deck so good at doing single target damage that it deals like more than 80 single target damage in 3 turns, really. If you get the relics that let you do that and go absolutely crazy, that's great, but keep in mind that against like Donu Deka, all of a sudden you have to deal 600 damage over the course of a fight. So if your deck's really good at dealing 200 damage over 3 turns, that doesn't get you anywhere, and they're going to have attacked you for, 70 damage in that time. You need to make a deck that's good at defending as well. You need to make a deck that's good at scaling as well for the longer fights. Adapting to how much card draw you have and prioritizing getting more card draw when needed, but not when it isn't needed, is an important thing to understand. I talked about Backflip in the Silent deck. Early on, Silent's very good at saturating energy for defensive cards, and honestly too good at saturating card draw for defending. You just draw more defensive cards than you really need a lot of the time. So Backflip's not a very useful card early in the game for Silent. However, generally Silent sort of has a tilt toward damage early on as you're adding more cards like Quick Slash and Predator and Dagger Spray to your deck. And then in preparation for late game, Silent needs to get good at scaling and may need to get to a point where she has more defensive cards, more ability to do the defensive job for a fight like the Act 2 boss fight. And at that point, grabbing a backflip for the turns where you want to block and scale is incredible, because it lets you block and it draws you more cards to get toward your scaling cards, which, you know, you may only have like 3 scaling cards in your deck. You may have a maybe a Footwork, a Noxious Fumes, and an Afterimage, or something like that. Could be your scaling for a boss fight. That's pretty reasonable, and Backflip is going to let you, on the turns where you want to spend some of your energy scaling with cards, is going to let you draw them. I see some decks that people make that just have way too many cards dedicated to scaling. Like, all of their energy is being put into playing Noxious Fumes early on, or something like that. Or a deck might have very energy-intensive scaling cards like Demon Form or Barricade, and a deck may seem like tone-deaf to this fact. Like, on top of having this Demon Form and Barricade, we also have a bunch of other scaling cards, and so we're drawing hands where we just have too many scaling cards in our hand to deploy, and we wanted to block as well. Making sure that you have a sensible number of cards which scale, enough to scale you to beat boss fights, but not so many that you're drawing more energy worth of scaling in hand so you can't even use it, or you're drawing scaling cards instead of block or attack cards and losing your ability to do those jobs is pretty important. Okay, another thing that I wanted to... Okay, I want to talk about 2 concepts which tie into this idea of, like, how many cards are you drawing and what can they do and how successfully can you saturate your energy with them. And those are card manipulation and deck size. Card manipulation is incredible for smoothing out your ability for your deck to do the right jobs on the right turns. So Well-Laid Plans is probably the standout card for card manipulation in the entire game. This lets you retain 1 or upgraded 2 cards at the end of your turn. And it may not seem like a huge deal, but if you really want to be able to block with 2 energy every turn and deploy scaling with another 2 energy every turn for the first 3 turns of boss fight or something like that, Well-Laid Plans is going to massively increase the percentage of the time that you're able to do that, because no longer are you just looking at 5 random cards. All of a sudden you're looking at 5 cards plus the card or 2 that you saved from last turn to help smooth out your draw. Well-Laid Plans plus cards which are able to sink a lot of energy into a job are very good. So Well-Laid Plans plus Leg Sweep. All of a sudden, if you're holding a Leg Sweep with Well-Laid Plans, you're never going to have a turn where you can't spend at least 2 energy on defense. Well-Laid Plans plus Skewer. If you're holding a Skewer with Well-Laid Plans, any turn where enemies choose not to attack you, you have the ability to put all of your energy into damage. Well-Laid Plans is also very good with combos when you're using combos to scale. So a way to scale in this game, I know I haven't talked that much about all the different ways to scale, and I probably won't get super into it, but one way to scale in this game is to deploy poison cards and then play Catalyst. You want to play Catalyst after you've added the poison to the enemies, though. And so it's pretty bad to draw Catalyst in, like, turn 1 or 2 if you haven't been able to put poison on enemies yet, but very good to draw Catalyst on turn 4 or 5 after you have. Well-Laid Plans lets you, if you drew Catalyst earlier on than you wanted it, hold it until when you actually do want it. You can go absolutely crazy, of course, with something like Nightmare, plus a card that you hold with Well-Laid Plans until you draw the Nightmare, and all of a sudden you have a ton of them and you get multiplicative scaling with some of the things in this game as well. Malaise is an excellent card with Well-Laid Plans, a way to sink all of your energy into debuffing an enemy for the rest of the fight on a turn where the enemy allows you to. Burst is a card which is amazing with Well-Laid Plans because of the ability to combo with another card on the turn that you want it to. So, like, having enough card manipulation lets you set up, like, combo jobs, sort of, where you have cards dedicated to comboing with other cards, And in a deck with little card manipulation or not enough card draw, these cards can be quite bad. Burst can be quite a bad card in a deck that doesn't have enough card draw and card manipulation to support it, because if you draw it with 4 strikes, this card is a dead card in its entirety. It does not contribute to your ability to defend or scale unless it gets drawn with another card which is already able to do that job. So you're making your deck more inconsistent by adding it. But with enough card manipulation to support that, it can be very powerful and very strong. So well-laid plans is an example of card manipulation. Another example of card manipulation is Headbutt for Ironclad. Headbutt is very good at preparing your deck to do something next turn, or even letting your deck do something this turn when it's paired with a card like Pommel Strike, or Havoc, or Shrug It Off. Ironclad has several commons and also uncommons and rares, which allow it to draw a card that's, or play a card that's on top of its deck immediately. And so with Headbutt, I can say, oh, I might need a Flame Barrier next turn, let's Headbutt it on top. Headbutt can also be very strong with scaling, like if I am scaling using a Rampage, for example, Headbutt lets me put it on top and play it over and over again. Or if I'm playing Limit Break several times, Headbutt lets me put Limit Break on top of my deck and play it again and scale up my strength. But it's really important to recognize that sometimes your scaling doesn't fit Headbutt, and so Headbutt's not as good of a card. It's really important to recognize how cards fit together. If instead my scaling is about playing like 2 Inflames, when I play a power, it's gone. It's in play for the rest of the fight. It's not in my discard pile. So I can't play an Inflame and then Headbutt it back on top again. If my scaling's about Inflame, or if my scaling's about like playing, for example, a Feel No Pain, a Corruption, and a Dark Embrace, Headbutt is no longer helping me scale. The card manipulation that I'm creating isn't useful anymore because I want to be using my card draw toward drawing these powers which scale for me and getting them in play rather than manipulating cards. And Headbutt costs me a card drawn to get this card manipulation working. So depending on what exactly your deck is trying to do, sometimes these cards can be very valuable and sometimes they're not valuable at all. I could say the same thing about a card even as strong as well-laid plans. If my deck is like 3 deadly poisons and I just want to play them and let the poison kill an enemy. Now this strategy won't work on Ascension 20, but if that were the case, it wouldn't be all that valuable to have well-laid plans really. If the deck can already saturate all of its energy on defense, because like the rest of it is defensive cards, and all I'm doing is trying to play like 3 deadly poisons, maybe like Crippling Cloud plus, that will beat Ascension 0 for me, and well-laid plans will not help me whatsoever, because all it's doing is being one card that I have to draw, which isn't one of my deadly poisons or Crippling Clouds. It's just getting in the way. Now, you'll never practically have that deck on Ascension 20, and well-laid plans is, practically speaking, pretty much always an incredible card on Ascension 20. But there are definitely circumstances where card manipulation isn't worth it because your deck doesn't actually benefit from the ability to manipulate those cards to, like, do the jobs better. And there are some cards in the game which manipulate cards which just don't do it very well. Tools of the Trade is one that stands out. This just doesn't help you manipulate cards very well. It just doesn't. Now, if you get like a bottled Tools of the Trade and a Duvu doll, maybe you could do something strong with that. But in general, spending 1 energy and 1 card drawn on a Tools of the Trade is not a particularly valuable thing to do. Tools of the Trade does not let you attack, one of your most important jobs. It doesn't make you defend on the turn where you play it, another one of your most important jobs. And in terms of scaling, drawing an extra card and then discarding a card is not particularly impressive scaling, and it's not particularly impressive card manipulation. There is scaling like Afterimage, or Footwork, or Noxious Fumes at exactly the same price as Tools of the Trade. And all of these cards do so much more than Tools of the Trade does. It's important to recognize when something is creating something that's just not actually really worth the price. And a deck which wants to put tools of the trade in play is probably built in a very odd way. There's a flip side to that. Something like machine learning, you can make innate. And so machine learning does something very similar to tools of the trade. Arguably, this is worse than what tools of the trade does because the discard in tools of the trade can be beneficial. The fact that I can make machine learning innate, though, and guarantee that it's in my starting hand, means that if I have relics like Gambling Chip or Bag of Preparation, and so my starting hand is regularly already strong enough at defending and dealing damage that I don't need more cards in my deck dedicated to that to make the starting hand good at those things, having something like Boot Sequence or Anchor is sort of similar. Like having a Boot Sequence and an Anchor in my deck means that my starting hand can always make 20 block, which means that it's much less important for my starting hand to be full of other sorts of cards. At that point, the innate on machine learning can guarantee that my turn 1 hand is able to do some sort of scaling, and that can be really valuable. You can say the same thing about Afterimage for Silent. The innate on the upgrade can be very valuable. Afterimage is like always a good card though, whereas machine learning, it's like specifically if I have a turn 1 and I want to guarantee that turn 1 can be spent on helping my deck scale, the innate on machine learning can be very valuable. There are lots of interesting judgment calls to be made there. All right, scaling and deck size. So I talked about Headbutt when combined with Limit Break and Rampage. So many people come to Slay the Spire and ask me, what's the right deck size? Is it better to have a large deck or a smaller deck? And the answer is that it depends which cards you're offered over the course of the run, because some cards like a large deck and some cards like a small deck. If your scaling is cards which you want to draw and play repeatedly, so for Ironclad, the quintessential example would be Limit Break probably, but also something like Spot Weakness or Rampage. If those are the cards you're offered and you're only offered 1 or 2 of them, you'd like your Ironclad deck to be able to draw them a lot, and having a smaller size deck makes you better at doing that. That means not adding a bunch of quality filler cards, like you probably don't want to have 3 copies of Flame Barrier in that deck. On the other hand, if your Ironclad deck is about deploying a bunch of powers, then the larger the deck is, the more powers you can have in it without polluting any single one of your 5-card draws. If you have a 30-card deck, you could have 6 powers in it, and on average, you'd only draw 1 power a turn with your 5 cards drawn per turn. So you're going to be able to scale over the course of 6 turns, get to a point where your powers are all working together and doing pretty well, without having any turns where you just draw nothing but powers. If you tried to put 6 powers into a 15-card deck, you're going to have some really bad hands, probably. So if your deck is more about scaling with like Feel No Pain, plus Corruption, plus Dark Embrace, this deck wants like 30 or 40 cards, most likely. You can say the same about silent decks with like Deadly Poison, I think. If your deck is scaling with like 1 or 2 Deadly Poisons, and that's your damage, which probably isn't the case late in the game, but maybe the case earlier on in the game, it may be quite important not to add a ton more cards to the deck. If you need to be able to beat something like Hexaghost with these Deadly Poisons, then you need to be able to draw them often enough. And so adding a card like Deflect or Dodge and Roll, a perfectly fine card, which makes you a little bit better at your defending job. It's like a filler card, which slightly improves your deck overall, but also thickens it. Could be bad, because now your Deadly Poison is getting drawn less often. On the other hand, if your deck has Noxious Fumes instead, say it has like 2 copies of Noxious Fumes, because those were the damage sources that you were offered over the course of Act 1. At this point, making sure that you're drawing enough defensive cards to like play 1 Noxious Fume every other turns, 1 Noxious Fume every other turns, but also like have like, you know, a strike or 2, 1 to dash or something like that, thrown in there for some more damage for hallway fights. It may be the case that you want to bloat your deck a little bit with more cards because of that type of scaling that's available to you. And making those calls is somewhat important. I would say that in general, Slay the Spire decks tend toward the same-ish number of cards for each class, just because of like the law of averages. The normal distribution, what's it called? The central limit theorem. Basically, we're talking about a bunch of RNG factors going together, and on average it ends up being that when you combine a bunch of RNG, you get round about a normal result, because you just have so many random factors on average. Like, it's like if you flip 100 coins, you usually get about 50 heads. But if you have that run where you're flipping coins and you get 70 heads instead, and so your run happens to have scaling cards which really want to be drawn often over and over again, you need to recognize that and make sure that your deck isn't getting too many cards in it for you to be able to do that. And if you have the other flip side, where all of your scaling cards are powers, which you really don't want to draw all at once because you'll die, you need to make sure that you're adding the appropriate number of just value bloat cards to your deck to make sure that your hands over the course of a fight are able to do things other than only play powers that turn. So, that's generally what I wanted to say about card draw and deck size and jobs and Slay the Spire. Just some like food for thought, the framework that I'm thinking about it in. Obviously I didn't get into everything there is to say, but I hope that I laid out how I'm thinking about stuff and gave you like the groundwork to understand the way that I'm thinking about it and use that or discard it as you see fit. The last thing I want to leave on is keep in mind, I think I said this somewhat, but I want to reiterate it. Keep in mind that potions and relics can do jobs for you too. So if you have relics which are very good at defense, you don't need a bunch of cards that are good at defense too, necessarily. I had a Perfected Strike run that I put on YouTube with a silly title and clickbait thumbnail and stuff because YouTube is stupid. But in that run, I had like 3 cards or 4 cards in a 40 card, 30 or 40 card deck which defended, and that was because on like floor 3, I opened a chest with a Self-Forming Clay in it, and Self-Forming Clay is a ridiculous defensive relic, which in particular is ridiculous against the heart, and from that moment, I knew that my deck didn't need as many defensive cards dedicated to it, and I picked up further defensive relics as I went on, and it was like, well, the damage I'm being offered is Perfected Strikes. The more of those that I put in the deck, the better they're going to get. I also got offered like a Demon Form, which is a very energy-intensive scaling card, so I was like, okay, well, if that's my scaling, I don't need to add a ton of other scaling cards, and I guess I'll just keep adding like Wild Strikes or whatever. And that was how my run progressed. And that wasn't like me memeing or whatever, but it also wasn't something that will happen again for hundreds of runs, because I don't usually get a Self-Forming Clay on the 3rd floor. And I don't usually follow that up by getting other good defensive relics as well. Adapting your run to the relics you're given is very, very important in Slay the Spire, and adapting your run to the potions you're given is minutely important as well. It's important to recognize when you have potions that let you beat an elite fight that you would otherwise be bad at, for example, because it means that you can go fight elite fights and you don't have to panic about that stuff nearly as much. It's important to recognize when a potion you have means that you can beat the Act 2 boss fight, because that means that you don't have to stress out quite as much about finding a scaling solution for the late game in Act 2. You've got a little bit more time until you get to like the elite fight against the giant head in Act 3 maybe, and that might be the first time that you need to be really good at scaling. Just keeping all of that stuff in mind and recognizing what's going on and adapting your deck to the circumstances it's presented with to make sure that it can do the jobs that it's asked to do over the course of the run is how you're going to get better and better and better at winning runs in Slay the Spire. Okay. I feel like there's so much more stuff to say about this, and there is. It's a very complicated game, that's why I keep coming back to it. But I hope that I've given you the groundwork. I'm actually gonna throw the presentation up on screen just because I wrote it all out. After writing it all out, I I read it and I was like, I don't like this very much. But just in case you're interested in the slides that I made, and maybe they can reinforce what I was saying for you, I will get them recorded. It's about card draw. Decks want to saturate energy. You can pause and read these slides if you want to. They want to saturate card draw. They have to make sacrifices to some jobs because they just don't have the ability to do all of them. Adapting to how much card draw you have is very important. Card manipulation is another, it's like the yin and yang of card draw, sort of. Card manipulation is another half of it, which sometimes costs card draw, but can solve the problems that card draw is solving in a better way. Scaling is a very important job as well. Scaling and deck size can go together in interesting ways, and relics can perform jobs that you might be trying to solve with cards, such that, you know, trying to solve a job with cards when you already have relics, which are very good at those jobs, doesn't really matter anymore. Alright. Thanks for hanging out and listening to this chat. Again, I'm Joe on Ribs. People call me Jorbs. My name, lots of people wonder what my name is. It means in between Jorbs. It's a joke that I thought was really funny when I was 12, when I came up with the username that I've been using on the internet ever since. So thanks, 12-year-old me. I'm Steven, or Steve as well, you can call me that, and I stream Slay the Spire pretty much every day over on Twitch. You're more than welcome to stop by, hang out. We just like do Ascension 20 heart runs all day and have fun, and I try to play very well, but there's room for jokes and memes as well on occasion. I'd love to see you there. You're always invited. If you want to become a part of my community without stopping by Twitch, maybe you just hate Twitch, feel free to sub to the YouTube channel. This is a place where I generally put content which stands out from the Twitch stream, like a really cool individual run, which I thought was unique, or content which doesn't fit onto Twitch. Like, I couldn't just talk for 30 plus minutes about this on Twitch. It would be weird. And I try to like interact with people and stuff on Twitch, which is not something I can do while I'm reading slides for 30 minutes really. So this sort of content goes on YouTube. Yeah, and then Discord is the place where you can ask me questions, where I'm available pretty much all the time that I'm awake for chatting with people. And if you have a run that you thought was really interesting, want to hear my thoughts or something, a link to Discord is below this video for you to hop in. Everybody's welcome. And share that stuff. We have a pretty sweet Discord community. I think we're coming up on 1,000 people signed up for it. Thanks for hanging out, everybody. Hope you're having a sweet holiday season. I'll see you next time.